People always want to know what he said to them. The retrieval team, I mean. The four men who came out of the dark in their corporate jumpsuits with their binding orders and their legal pads and their certainty that I was a line item on a manifest waiting to be collected. They want to know what Ravik Osha said that made four armed company men climb back into their lander and leave without me. He didn't say much. That was the thing about Ravik, he never needed to. I've told this story at the IWC hearings. I've told it to the journalists who found us after the Havoc ruling came down. I've told it to my own children, who are old enough now to ask. But I've never told it from the beginning, from the part that happened before I could form words in any human language. The part I know only because Ravik told it to me, piece by piece, over 11 years of long nights at the relay post, when the signal traffic was quiet and there was nothing to do but sit at the window and watch the dust move across the flats. So I'll tell it the way he told it to me. He heard the impact at 3:40 local, a sound like a fist against the hull of the post, followed by a low subsonic thrum that vibrated the coffee in his mug. He was 51 years old, 11 years into a solo rotation at Waypoint Kess, a frontier relay installation on a dead moon called Orham's Flat, so remote that the nearest populated station was 14 hours by courier ship. The post was a squat pressurized block of insulated alloy, instrumentation towers on 3 sides, a landing pad on the 4th. Ravik had a cot, a galley, a communications array, a library of 4,000 titles he'd worked through twice, and a job that consisted, in essence, of keeping the signal alive so that other people's messages could reach other people. He had chosen it deliberately. He was not, by that point in his life, a man who wanted to be needed. He pulled on his thermals and his boots and went outside, because that was procedure, and because 11 years of sole occupancy on a dead moon had not made him careless about procedure. The atmosphere at Orham's Flat was thin enough to require a filtration mask but not a full suit. He crossed the pad in the blue-black of the moon's long night, flashlight cutting the dust, and found the courier capsule 40 meters out in the flats, half buried where it had skipped twice and stopped. The capsule was a standard automated freight pod, the kind that carried small cargo between relay points when human courier was too expensive. This one had come off its trajectory, likely a guidance failure. It had broken open on the second impact. Ravik walked the debris line and found the cargo strewn across 20 meters of gray rock, sealed vacuum parcels, a manifest cylinder, and then at the far end of the scatter field, something that didn't belong. A secondary container, medical-grade composite, the seals still intact, smaller than a standard freight unit, marked with a Havoc Extraction Corporation shipping code and below it a disposal notation. He said the disposal notation stopped him, not because he hadn't seen corporate disposal codes before. Havoc moved a lot of biological material through the frontier routes, specimens and samples from survey operations, but because the notation on this container had a subcategory designation he recognized. Sapient class. Living. He stood over it in the dark for what he described as a long time, long enough that the cold got into his hands. Then he keyed the emergency release on the seal. Inside, on a bed of environmental foam, was a child. She was small enough that the container had room to spare around her. She was curled on her side, breathing. The environmental systems in the pod had kept her oxygenated through the crash. Her skin was the color of pale celadon, a faint greenish gray, and her ears came to soft points above the line of her hair, which was the white of old bone. She was not human. Her proportions were close enough that the comparison arrived before he could stop it, but the bone structure of her face was finer than any human child's. Her eyes, when they opened, were too wide and the color of amber lit from behind, and she had 4 fingers on each hand, not 5. She wore something that had once been a medical smock over large, the hem dragging past her ankles. Around her left wrist was a band, not a medical bracelet, a Havoc asset tag, 8 digits and a bar code. She looked at him without making a sound. He said she didn't cry. He said she looked at him the way something looks at you when it has already seen the worst thing and is waiting to find out if you are more of the same. He picked her up. That was the first decision. All the decisions that followed were downstream of that one. She didn't resist. She didn't cling. She allowed it, which he said was harder to absorb than either alternative would have been. He carried her back across the flat, through the post's airlock, and set her on the cot with his extra thermal blanket pulled over her. He heated water. He found the ration pack with the highest sugar content. He set it on the cot beside her and stepped back and let her decide. She ate eventually, slowly watching him the whole time. He filed an incident report with the relay network at 500, flagging the capsule wreck and recovered cargo. He did not, in that report, mention the child. That was the second decision, and he made it carefully. The incident report would route to Havoc's logistics arm before it reached any regulatory body. He needed time, and he needed a different channel. He spent the next 6 hours in the communications bay while she slept on his cot. He was not an attorney. He was not an advocate. He was a relay technician with a secondary certification in frontier habitation law, which he had obtained for no reason he could have articulated at the time, in year 4 of his posting, because the library had the course materials and the nights were long. Frontier habitation law, under IWC Compact Article 7, Paragraph 9, recognized a category called dependent registration. It had been written for human settlers on remote installations who had children without access to a census hub. If a postkeeper registered a sapient minor as a resident dependent of a recognized frontier installation, the minor's status was protected under IWC jurisdiction pending formal registration review, which could take, given the IWC's caseload and Orem's Flats distance from a review hub, between 60 and 90 standard days. Havoc's disposal order, which was a corporate document, had no standing against an IWC registration. Corporate property claims on sapient-class beings had been legally ambiguous for decades and formally contested by 3 pending IWC rulings. He didn't need to win the case. He needed to hold the line long enough for the case to reach someone who could win it. He filed the dependent registration at 611. He named her Saya because that was a word in his grandmother's language that meant something close to shade or shelter, and because she needed a name that belonged to no one who had hurt her. The registration confirmation came back in 47 minutes, accepted pending review. Provisional IWC protection, 63 days. He went back to the cot, and she was awake, watching the porthole. The flats outside were pale in the moon's long dawn. He pulled the chair over and sat, and they were quiet together, and he said that was the first time in a long time that being quiet had not felt like being alone. The retrieval team arrived on day 4. Havoc moved quickly when it wanted to. The lander came down on the pad at 900, and 4 men got out in company coveralls with company authority and a corporate reclamation order on a notarized tablet. Their team lead was a man named Prast, compact and careful-voiced, who had the manner of someone who had done this before and preferred it to go smoothly. Rivik met them at the airlock. He was, I should tell you, not a physically remarkable man. Medium height, the kind of build that suggested a hard youth and a sedentary decade since. He wore the same patchwork jacket he wore every day, the Frontier Relay Authority patch on the shoulder. He had not shaved in 4 days, which was normal. He was carrying, because regulations required him to carry when meeting unscheduled landings, a short bolt-action surveyor's rifle, which he held the way you hold something that is not currently a weapon but could become one. Prast showed him the reclamation order. Rivik looked at it without touching it. "You're here for the asset," Rivik said. "We're here for company property recovered from the wreck site," Prast said. "The capsule contents are Havoc property under Freight Manifest. We're authorized to retrieve and transport." The capsule contents included a sapient minor, Rivik said. She is registered as a dependent of this installation under IWC Compact Article 7, Paragraph 9. That registration is confirmed. He held up his own tablet, showing the IWC timestamp and reference number. Your reclamation order has no standing against an active IWC registration. Prast looked at the timestamp. Something moved through his expression that he controlled quickly. That registration will be contested. It will, Rivik agreed. By the IWC process. You're welcome to file a counterclaim. The review period is 63 days. Until the review resolves, she stays here. She's not a person under Havix. She's registered as a person under IWC jurisdiction, Rivik said, and his voice didn't change, not 1 degree. And this is an IWC relay installation, and you're standing on my pad without a landing clearance I was required to issue, which I did not, which means you are currently in technical violation of Frontier Post Access Code, which I can escalate or I can choose not to, depending on how this conversation goes. He was not a man who raised his voice. He never raised his voice in all the years I knew him. It wasn't necessary. When Rivik Osha wanted you to understand that he was not going to move, you understood it the way you understand the weight of a wall. Prast spent another few minutes. He made 2 calls on his comm, stepping away from the airlock. Rivik waited. The 3 other men stood and looked at the nothing of the flats and didn't say anything. One of them was young enough that Rivik, telling me this, said he felt briefly sorry for him. When Prast came back, his expression had settled into the specific flatness of a man who is going to make someone else's life difficult later, and is filing that intention away for now. We'll file the contest, Prast said. You know where to reach the IWC, Rivik said. They left. The lander lifted in a column of displaced dust and was gone before the dust had settled. Rivik stood on the pad until the sound was gone. Then he went inside. I was sitting at the galley table. I had heard all of it through the porthole. He told me later that he had not thought to move me to a room without a porthole, and he was briefly angry at himself for that, for letting me hear men discuss whether I was property. But when he came in and looked at me, he said I wasn't distressed. I was simply watching him, those amber eyes steady, waiting to see what he was going to do next. He sat down across from me. They're gone, he said. I already knew that, I had seen. 63 days, he said, not to me exactly, more to the room, ticking through his own plan. I've flagged the case to the IWC Advocacy Office. I have documentation of the sapient class notation on the original shipping container, which is evidence of corporate intent to transport and dispose of a sapient being, which is a different charge category than property dispute. He paused. This is going to take a while, and it's going to get louder before it gets quieter. I want you to know that. I looked at him. I didn't have his language yet, not then, but I understood what he was doing. You understand more than words when words are not available to you. You understand tone, and you understand presence, and you understand the difference between someone who is telling you a plan because they are accountable to you and someone who is telling you a plan because they want you to be quiet. He was accountable to me. I had known that since the moment he opened the container. I reached across the table and put my hand over his, 4 fingers against 5. That was all. He told me, years later, that he sat there for a long time after that, and that he thought about the 11 years before the capsule hit the flats. The years he had arranged so carefully to require nothing of him, to ask nothing back, to let him be a keeper of signals that meant nothing to him personally. He thought about why a man might want that. And he thought about how strange it was that the answer to the question he had never asked was sitting across a galley table from him at the edge of the known world, looking at him with ancient amber eyes. The IWC case took 4 months, not 63 days. Havik contested aggressively. There were 2 hearings Rivik attended by relay link, in his work jacket, with his Frontier Authority patch, speaking in the measured way he spoke, answering every question with precision and no visible concern for his own position. There was a third hearing he attended in person, which meant a 14-hour transit to the nearest station and back, during which I stayed at the post with a relay colleague Rivik trusted, an older woman named Det who taught me my first 50 words in standard over the course of those 4 days. The ruling came down on a gray morning. Havik's property claim was denied on sapient being grounds. The IWC advocacy ruling cited the shipping notation as evidence of deliberate misclassification. 3 Havik logistics officers were referred for separate proceedings, and I was formally registered for the purposes of IWC records as Saya Osha, dependent of Rivik Osha, Waypoint Kess, Orams Flat. He read me the ruling at the galley table. He read it straight through without commentary, his voice doing that level, uninflected thing it did when something mattered enough to require that he not let his voice reflect how much it mattered. When he finished, he set the tablet down and looked out the porthole at the flats. "Well," he said, "that was all." I was 9 or 10 years old by then, by human counting. We were never certain of my exact age. The medical smock had provided no records, only the asset tag, which Rivik had removed on day 1 and incinerated. I had his language by that point, and a reasonable grasp of 2 others, and I had read through approximately a third of his library with his help and on my own, and I had learned the relay array well enough to run the overnight shifts while he slept. I knew the names of every major IWC compact article. I knew how to file a frontier habitation registration. I knew what a disposal notation was, and what sapient class meant in corporate logistics language, and what it meant in every other language. I knew that the man across the table from me had bet 11 years of solitude on the fact that something better ought to exist, and had stayed long enough that, when the night came to prove it, he was there. "Rivik," I said. He looked at me. I didn't have a word. I've had 40 years since that morning to find one, and I still don't, not in any language I speak, not in his, not in mine. There is no word for the specific thing a child feels toward the person who decided, at 3:40 on a dead moon, that she was worth opening a container for. Language wasn't built for it. It's older than language. He nodded, just once, the way he nodded when he understood something and didn't need it explained further. We went back to work. There was a signal backlog from the overnight queue, and the Eastern array had thrown a calibration error in the night, and there was always something to be done at a relay post. We worked through the morning in our usual quiet, the post warm around us, the flats pale and still through the porthole. In the evening, I sat at the window, watching the dust move the way I had watched it for 4 months, and Rivik sat in his chair and read, and the signal indicators on the board glowed their steady green, meaning the array was up, meaning the messages were moving, meaning everything out there that needed to reach somewhere was reaching. He had kept the post for 11 years before I came. He kept it for 9 more after, until his health made the solo rotation untenable, and then he transferred the certification to me, and I kept it after him. I am keeping it still. I don't know what he was waiting for in those 11 years before. I don't know if he knew. But I know that when the capsule hit the flats and he went out into the dark and found what he found, something in him recognized it. The reason, the specific reason, the answer to the question the solitude had been quietly asking. He never said that. He was not a man who said things like that. He didn't have to. I was there.